The glittering ballroom fell silent, the only sound the drip, drip, drip of crimson wine staining the white apron of the maid on the floor. Bianca Valerio stood over her, a cruel smirk on her perfect face, having just emptied her glass. "So clumsy," Bianca sneered. From the shadows, a voice like cold steel cut through the air. "Who? Touched? You?" The city's most feared man, Dante Volkov, stepped into the light, his eyes not on the laughing socialite, but on the bruised hand of the girl on the floor. And in that moment, everyone was about to learn she wasn't just his maid. The Volkov estate was a fortress of glass and stone, perched high in the hills, a modern-day castle that loomed over the city. Its owner, Dante the Devil Volkov, was a man who collected secrets and traded in fear. And in this fortress, Serafina Hayes was a ghost. To the world, she was just one of the staff, a quiet, efficient maid in a severe black uniform and a crisp white apron. She had been here for 6 months, learning the geography of the house like the back of her hand. She knew which floorboard creaked outside the study, which tapestries concealed reinforced steel, and which of the security guards preferred their coffee black. She was invisible, and in this house, invisibility was survival. Her days were a routine of quiet obedience. She reported to Mrs. Petrova, the head housekeeper, a formidable woman with a steel-grey bun and an expression to match. Mrs. Petrova managed the household with military precision, and she tolerated no mistakes. "You are here to see and not be seen," Mrs. Petrova had instructed her on the first day. "You are to hear and not to speak. The master, he does not suffer fools." Serafina was no fool. She was the opposite. She was meticulously careful. She kept her head down, her eyes averted. She scrubbed marble floors until they reflected the sky and polished glasses until they were invisible. She moved through the opulent rooms, the grand library with its 2-story shelves, the ballroom that sat empty most days, the suffocatingly formal dining room, like a phantom. Dante Volkov himself was more myth than man. She saw him, of course, but always in glimpses. A broad back in a custom-tailored Armani suit, the low, dangerous rumble of his voice on a phone call, the scent of expensive cologne, and something metallic, like cold steel, that lingered in a room long after he'd left. He was a man made of shadows and sharp edges. His security detail, led by his right-hand man, Marco, moved with the same lethal grace. The staff whispered about him. They said he'd inherited the Volkov criminal empire at 25 after his father's unfortunate accident. They said he'd doubled its worth in 5 years. They said he had no heart, no mercy, and no weaknesses. Serafina believed it. She'd seen high-profile businessmen enter his study, looking confident, and leave an hour later, pale and shaking. She'd seen the casual way he commanded a room, how even the most hardened men deferred to him with barely concealed terror. But Serafina had a secret. One night, weeks ago, she had been in the library, long after the rest of the staff had retired. She wasn't cleaning. She was reading. She had pulled a heavy volume of classic poetry from the shelf, a small indulgence she couldn't resist. She had been so lost in the words, she hadn't heard the door open. "What are you doing?" The voice was like gravel and ice. She'd frozen, the book snapping shut in her hands. Dante Volkov stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light. He was in a black shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms covered in intricate tattoos. "Sir, I was just—" she stammered, scrambling to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I was dusting. I'll go." He didn't move. He just watched her, His eyes, a strange, piercing grey, raked over her, from her messy bun to the smudge of dust on her cheek, to the book she clutched like a shield. "You were dusting," he repeated, his voice flat, "at 2 a.m. Yes. I couldn't sleep." It was a pathetic lie. He took a step into the room. The shadows clung to him. "Which one?" he asked. "Sir, the book." She looked at the cover, her face flushing. It's Keats, sir." He was silent for a long moment. She expected him to yell, to fire her, to have Marco throw her out. Instead, he just looked. It wasn't the blank, dismissive look he gave the staff. It was sharp, assessing, as if he was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. "He's weak," Dante said finally, walking past her to the bar cart in the corner. "All that talk of beauty and truth. In my world, truth is a weapon, and beauty is a cage." He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass. He didn't offer her one. "Go to bed, girl," he said, not turning around. "And stop dusting in my library." She had fled, her skin prickling. He hadn't fired her. He hadn't even raised his voice. But something had changed. After that, she felt his eyes on her. When she served coffee at his meetings, his gaze would flicker to her hands. When she passed him in the hall, the air would crackle. He still never spoke to her, and she remained the invisible maid. But Serafina knew, and he knew, that she was something more. And that was the most dangerous secret of all, because Serafina wasn't just his maid. She was his prisoner, his secret, and his salvation. She was the last surviving heir of the Hayes family, the only person alive who could challenge his claim to the empire, or secure it forever, and he, in turn, was the only man who could keep her alive. The fragile, unspoken truce between them, the master and the ghost, was shattered by the arrival of an embossed invitation, not to Serafina, but to the house itself. "The Consigliere's gala," Mrs. Petrova announced one morning, her voice tight with stress. "Next Friday. Here. The master is hosting." A ripple of panic went through the staff. A normal dinner party for Mr. Volkov was a logistical nightmare. A gala, a full gathering of all the allied family heads, was a war. The guest list would include the most powerful and dangerous people in the country. "This is not a party," Mrs. Petrova warned them, her dark eyes finding each staff member. "This is a performance. Every glass, every napkin, every smile must be perfect. The master's reputation is built on control. We will not be the weak link." The house immediately transformed. Trucks of flowers and cases of Dom Perignon champagne arrived. Security teams swept the property, installing new cameras and pat-down stations. The air became thick with a nervous, electric energy. And then, 4 days before the gala, Bianca Valerio arrived. If Dante Volkov was the king, Bianca was the woman who had decided she would be queen. She was the daughter of Silvio Valerio, another powerful family head. Their alliance with the Volkovs was new and tenuous, and it was an open secret that Silvio was trying to merge their families through marriage. Bianca was stunning, in the way a venomous viper is stunning. She had flawless olive skin, cascades of dark hair, and eyes that held a chilling, aristocratic emptiness. She moved into one of the guest suites and began to treat the estate and its staff as her own. Her first interaction with Serafina was swift and brutal. Serafina was carrying a tray of coffee to the patio where Bianca was holding court with some friends she had invited over. "You there?" Bianca called, snapping her fingers. "Coffee, now." "Yes, Miss Valerio," Serafina said, moving to serve her. As she leaned in, Bianca shifted in her chair, accidentally, jogging Serafina's arm. Hot coffee sloshed over the rim of the cup and onto the tray. "Ugh, you clumsy idiot!" Bianca shrieked, recoiling as if she'd been burned, though not a drop had touched her. "Look at this! You nearly scalded me! What is this? The first day on the job? Do you know how much this La Perla robe cost?" Serafina straightened, her face pale but composed. "My apologies, miss. I will fetch a new cup." "You'll do more than that," Bianca sneered. "You'll get on your knees and clean this floor. I see a spot you missed." Serafina's jaw tightened. From the corner of her eye, she could see one of Dante's security guards, posted by the French doors, tensing, but he didn't move. This was not his domain. "Of course, miss," Serafina said. She placed the tray on a nearby table, fetched a napkin, and knelt to wipe the small spill. "Pathetic," Bianca muttered to her friend, just loud enough for Serafina to hear. "They let anything in off the streets these days. I'll be speaking to Dante about the quality of his help. He needs a woman's touch around here to manage the filth." Serafina finished, her hand shaking slightly, not with fear but with a deeply buried rage. She stood, collected her tray, and said in a calm, even voice, "Will there be anything else, Miss Valerio?" Bianca just waved her away, a dismissive flick of the wrist. Serafina turned and walked back into the house, her back straight. She didn't see Dante Volkov standing in the shadows of the upper balcony, overlooking the patio. He hadn't moved, he hadn't spoken, but he had been watching, and the hand resting on the stone balustrade was clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned bone white. For the next few days, Bianca made Serafina her personal project. She would ring the service bell at all hours, demanding fresh towels, specific bottled water, or complaining about imaginary dust. She would, accidentally, drop a glass or knock over a vase when Serafina was near. It was a petty war of attrition designed to break her. Serafina bore it all with a quiet, unnerving dignity. This infuriated Bianca. She couldn't understand why the little maid didn't cry, or beg, or quit. She didn't understand that for Serafina Hayes, this was nothing. She had survived the fire that killed her parents. She had survived the 2 years on the run, hunted by the Grimaldi brothers. She had survived being found by Dante Volkov, the man who had been her family's greatest rival and was now her only protector. A little bullying from a spoiled socialite was the least of her worries. But Serafina was making a critical error. She assumed Bianca was just a bully. She didn't realize that Bianca was also a predator, and she had just identified Serafina as something different. Bianca had seen the way Dante's eyes sometimes followed the maid, and a predator knows to eliminate the competition, no matter how insignificant it seems. The night of the gala was approaching, and Bianca was planning to make a statement. The night of the Consigliere's gala, the Volkov estate was unrecognizable. It had been transformed from a cold fortress into a glittering palace of light. Valets in crisp uniforms lined the long, winding drive, handling a steady stream of Rolls-Royce Phantoms, Bentleys, and black Cadillac Escalades. A string quartet played classical music on the terrace, the sound mingling with the low hum of hundreds of powerful voices. Inside, the grand ballroom was a sea of black ties, Armani suits, and shimmering gowns. Champagne flowed from towering fountains, and waiters, all new, hired from an outside agency for the event, moved with silver trays. The permanent staff, including Serafina, had been relegated to backstage roles, or, in her case, specific, high-level service. Her job tonight was simple: keep a low profile, assist the agency staff, and stay out of the way. She wore her standard black uniform, but Mrs. Petrova had issued her a new, starched white apron, a symbol of her seniority. She moved through the glittering crowd, a ghost in her element. She saw men who ran entire cities, men who could make a phone call and make a person disappear. She saw their wives, draped in diamonds, their smiles as sharp and cold as their jewelry. It was a room built on power, lies, and fragile alliances. And at the center of it all, holding court by the massive fireplace, was Dante. He was breathtaking in his power. His custom tuxedo fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He wore no jewelry save for a single, heavy signet ring on his left hand, the Volkov family crest. He was surrounded by men, but he spoke to no one, simply listening, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Bianca Valerio was fastened to his side, a triumphant jewel in a blood-red Versace gown that left little to the imagination. She laughed too loudly at his non-existent jokes, her hand possessively on his arm. "Dante, darling," her voice carried, "you must tell Silvio about our trip to Monaco." Dante's expression was carved from ice. He nodded, sipped his drink, and his eyes scanned the room. They swept past politicians, over a rival family head, and for a fraction of a second they landed on Serafina as she passed by the doorway. It was nothing, a flicker, but it was enough. Bianca, ever watchful of her prize, saw the flicker. She followed his gaze. All she saw was the little maid, the mouse, scurrying by with a tray. A flicker of deep, irrational hatred sparked in Bianca's eyes. It was one thing to be ignored by Dante, but to be ignored by him for that? A servant? Serafina, blissfully unaware, continued her rounds. She was heading to a service corridor to refill her tray when she was suddenly cut off. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in," a voice purred. Serafina stopped. Bianca was there, flanked by two other women who looked like identical copies of her. They had effectively blocked the corridor. "Miss Valerio," Serafina said, dipping her head, "if you'll excuse me." "I don't think I will," Bianca said, stepping closer. The smell of her perfume was cloying. "You know, I was just telling my friends, I don't understand how Dante can stand the sight of you. You're so plain, so dirty." "I'm just doing my job, miss," Serafina said, trying to step around her. Bianca's friend, a blonde named Tabitha, put a hand on Serafina's arm. "Bianca's talking to you, Mouse. Where are your manners?" "Please let me pass," Serafina said, her voice dropping, taking on a cold edge she rarely used. Bianca's smile widened. "Oh, it has a little bit of fight. How cute." She looked Serafina up and down, her gaze lingering on the pristine white apron. "You know, that white, it's just begging for a little color. Don't you think?" "Bianca, what are you doing?" Tabitha asked, sounding nervous for the first time. "Let's just go." "In a minute." Bianca looked around. The corridor was empty. They were between the ballroom and the kitchens, shielded from view. "I think," Bianca said, her eyes glittering, "that it's time someone taught this little rat her place." She accidentally tripped, stumbling forward. Serafina boxed in, tried to step back, but Bianca grabbed her arm, her nails digging in. "Oops!" Bianca cried, and tripped again, this time shoving Serafina hard against the wall. Serafina hit the wall with a grunt, her shoulder aching. The tray she was carrying clattered to the floor, but it was empty. "So clumsy," Bianca mocked, righting herself. "Bianca, stop! Someone will see," her other friend whispered, tugging on her arm. "Let them," Bianca said, her blood up. She was enjoying this. She turned to leave, then paused. She looked at Serafina, who was leaning against the wall, her eyes dark with a silent, controlled fury. "You know," Bianca said, a cruel idea forming. "You're right. This isn't the place." She smoothed her gown. "Let's go back to the party." But don't worry, Mouse. I'm not finished with you. She swept away, her friends in her wake, leaving Serafina alone in the corridor, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with the cold, hard realization that this was far from over. Serafina took a deep breath, forcing the tremor from her hands. She straightened her uniform, picked up the tray, and pushed the confrontation from her mind. She was a survivor. She would survive this. Her only goal was to make it through the night, invisible. She re-entered the ballroom, keeping to the perimeter. The party was in full swing. Laughter and music filled the air, a loud, bright cover for the dark deals being struck in the corners. She secured a new tray of champagne flutes and began her circuit. She saw Bianca holding court near the grand piano. The woman was animated, telling a story to a circle of admirers, all of them laughing. Bianca's eyes scanned the crowd, and then they found Serafina. A slow, predatory smile spread across Bianca's face. She lifted her own glass. Not champagne, but a deep, dark red wine. She said something to her friends and began to move, not directly toward Serafina, but on an intercept course. Serafina's instincts screamed. She tried to turn, to retreat to the kitchens, but the room was too crowded. A portly man in a white dinner jacket blocked her path, grabbing a glass from her tray and patting her on the back. "Good girl," he slurred. By the time she was free, it was too late. Bianca was in front of her. "Oh, Mouse," Bianca said, her voice dangerously sweet. "You're still here. I thought you'd be in the kitchens, scrubbing pots." The music in the immediate area seemed to die down. People were watching. This was what Bianca wanted, a public stage. "Excuse me, Miss Valerio," Serafina said, her voice low, trying to move past. Not so fast. Bianca put a perfectly manicured hand on Serafina's tray, stopping her. "I've been thinking. You missed a spot earlier." "Bianca," a man's voice, her father's, called from across the room. "Leave the help alone." Bianca's smile tightened. Her father's rebuke in public had lit a match to her temper. "In a moment, Papa," she called back. She turned to Serafina, her eyes flashing. "Dante likes his things perfect, and you," she said, flicking her eyes over the simple uniform, "are a stain on his home." "Please," Serafina whispered, a thread of real desperation in her voice. "Don't." "Don't what?" Bianca asked, feigning innocence. "Don't help?" She raised her glass of red wine. "You look so pale. You need some color." And with a deliberate, vicious movement, Bianca shoved Serafina. It wasn't just a bump. It was a full-bodied push designed to send her sprawling. Serafina, off balance from the heavy tray, stumbled backward. The tray flew from her hands, champagne flutes scattering across the marble floor with a series of sharp, musical smashes. Serafina herself fell, landing hard on one knee. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The string quartet faltered, then stopped. Silence. Serafina knelt on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and spilled champagne. Her knee was screaming in protest, and she felt a sharp sting in her hand, which she'd put out to catch herself on a shard of glass. "Oh dear," Bianca said, stepping over the mess. Her voice was laced with false sympathy. She looked down at Serafina, a look of utter contempt on her face. "You're not just clumsy, you're a disaster. You've ruined the party." She still held her own glass of red wine. "And you're still so pale." Before anyone could move, before Serafina could even register the intent, Bianca tilted her wrist. It wasn't a splash. It was a pour. A slow, deliberate stream of dark red wine cascaded down the front of Serafina's pristine white apron, soaking through to her uniform beneath. It looked like a blood stain, a gaping wound against the white. Drip, drip, drip. The wine pooled on the floor. Bianca smiled, a triumphant, vicious expression. "There," she said, her voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "That's better." She looked at the stain, then at Serafina's face. "You're fired, little mouse. Go clean yourself up and get out of this house." Serafina was frozen. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing her down. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her. She saw pity in some, amusement in others, and cold indifference in most. She was nothing. She was the dirt on the floor. She closed her eyes, her hand throbbing. A single drop of her blood from the cut on her palm welled up and mixed with the spilled wine on the floor, and in that deafening silence, a new sound emerged, a single set of slow, deliberate footsteps. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound of expensive leather shoes on marble, approaching with the finality of a death knell. A shadow fell over her, a voice, low and cold enough to freeze the blood, cut through the silence. "Bianca!" Dante Volkov stood in the center of the broken circle. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. The single word, his quiet use of her name, had all the force of a gunshot. Bianca's triumphant expression faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Dante, darling," she said, forcing a laugh, "can you believe this? This creature. She just threw a tray of glasses at my feet. She almost cut me." Dante didn't look at Bianca. His gaze was fixed on the floor. He wasn't looking at the spilled wine. He wasn't looking at the broken glass. He was looking at the small, bright bead of blood welling up from Serafina's palm. He took another step, stopping directly in front of the kneeling girl. He was a mountain, blocking out the light, shielding her from the prying eyes of the room. Serafina looked up, her vision blurry with unshed tears of rage and humiliation. She saw the perfect crease in his trousers, the shine of his shoes. Dante crouched. It was not a small gesture. This man, Dante Volkov, a man who commanded presidents and kings, who did not bow to anyone, crouched down on the marble floor. He was now at her eye level. The room held its breath. He ignored the wine stain completely. He ignored her tear-streaked face. His entire focus was on her hand, which she had clenched into a fist to stop the bleeding. "Open your hand," he commanded. His voice was quiet, a low rumble meant only for her. She hesitated. "Serafina, open your hand." Slowly she unclenched her fist. A small, clean cut, deep and red, split the skin of her palm. A single drop of blood fell onto his polished shoe. He didn't flinch. He just stared at the cut. Then his eyes lifted. They were no longer the cold grey of a businessman. They were black. Utterly, terrifyingly black. The pupils were so dilated they had eclipsed the iris. It was the look the staff whispered about, the look that came right before someone disappeared. His voice dropped to a lethal growl, the one his enemies heard in their nightmares. It vibrated in the air, a physical force. It was not a question of what happened. It was not a request for information. It was an accusation. It was a promise. It was the sound of a predator identifying its target. Serafina's breath hitched. She couldn't speak. She was trapped in the intensity of his gaze. She didn't have to say a word. Her eyes, wide and still, shimmering with humiliation, flickered for half a second. A half-second glance over his shoulder. To Bianca. That was all it took. Dante's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw jumped. He slowly reached out, not to help her up, not to offer comfort, but to take her injured hand. He cradled her palm in his large, warm fingers gently closing around hers, containing the wound. Then, With an athlete's grace, he rose to his full height, pulling her up with him. He didn't just help her up, he pulled her, bringing her stumbling against his chest. He wrapped his free arm around her waist, locking her to his side. He was holding her like a possession, a shield, a statement. The entire ballroom was in stunned silence. The little maid, stained in red wine and blood, was plastered against the side of the most powerful man in the city. Dante turned his head. His black, fathomless eyes finally settled on Bianca Valerio. Bianca had gone pale. The playful smirk was gone, replaced by a dawning, confused horror. "Dante, what are you doing?" she stammered. "She's just a maid. She's staff. She assaulted me." "You stained her uniform," Dante said. His voice was still quiet, conversational, which was somehow more terrifying than a shout. Bianca forced a high, brittle laugh. "Dante, darling, are you crazy? It's just a maid. I'll buy you a new one. I'll buy you a dozen." Dante's head snapped toward her. The politeness vanished. "A new what?" he snarled. A new servant. Whatever she is. She's nothing." "She is not nothing," Dante said, his voice dropping as he looked down at the top of Serafina's head, nestled against his suit. He lifted her chin with one finger, forcing her to look at him. "Are you all right?" he murmured. She just nodded, overwhelmed. "Good," he said. He then looked back at the crowd, at Bianca, at her stunned father. "My apologies," Dante announced to the room, his voice now booming with command. "It seems there has been a misunderstanding." He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo. He did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a large silk handkerchief. He gently, almost tenderly, took Serafina's hand and began to wrap the cut. "You see," he continued, his voice dangerously smooth, "I have been remiss. I have allowed an assumption to fester in my home." He finished with her hand. He kept it in his. "This," he said, his voice booming, "is Serafina." He paused. "Serafina Volkov, my wife." The silence that followed was not just an absence of noise. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of over 200 people's worlds simultaneously tilting on their axis. Bianca Valerio's father, Silvio, dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing the shattering of his ambitions. Bianca herself just stared, her mouth open, her face a mask of grotesque disbelief. "Whoa, what? What did you say? That's not funny, Dante. That's a sick joke." "Do I look like I'm joking, Bianca?" Dante's voice was arctic. He turned to Serafina, who was looking at him with wide, shocked eyes. This was not the plan. He ignored her silent protest. He lifted her left hand, the one that wasn't injured, and held it up for the room to see. There, on her ring finger, was a simple, thin platinum band. It was a ring she wore under her glove when she cleaned, a ring she never took off, a ring that everyone had assumed was a cheap trinket or a memory of a lost love. "We were married 6 months ago," Dante announced, in private, for security reasons. He looked directly at Silvio Valerio. "You, of all people, should understand the need for security." He then turned his gaze to the rest of the room. "Let me be clear. You are not looking at my maid. You are looking at the donna of this house. You are looking at the donna of the Volkov family." He turned back to Bianca, his eyes lethally cold. "You didn't just spill wine on a servant, Bianca. You didn't just humiliate a guest. You put your hands on my wife." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The finality of his words, the quiet, possessive rage, was more terrifying than any threat. He leaned down and, in front of everyone, he kissed Serafina. It was not a gentle, romantic kiss. It was a claim. It was a brand. It was a public declaration of ownership, a binding of her to him, a warning to every other man in the room. He kissed her hard, his hand tangling in her simple bun, pulling it loose so her dark hair tumbled down her back. When he pulled away, she was breathless, and her lips were bruised. He rested his forehead against hers for a bare second, a moment of impossible intimacy in a room full of enemies. Minutes later, he whispered, so only she could hear, everyone knew. He was quoting her, quoting the promise he'd made to her months ago, when he'd first brought her here. They will all know you, but not 1 second before I'm ready. And when they find out, everyone will know she wasn't just his maid. He straightened, his arm a steel bar around her waist. He was still holding her bloody, bandaged hand. "Marco," Dante said. His head of security, who had been watching from the edge of the room with a look of grim satisfaction, stepped forward. "Sir." "Escort Miss Valerio and her father out of my home," Dante ordered. "Their invitation is revoked." "Dante, no!" Bianca shrieked, the mask of civility finally cracking. "You can't! Papa, do something!" Silvio Valerio was ashen. He knew what this meant. This was not just a social slight. This was an execution, a public breaking of their alliance. In their world, this was a declaration of war, or at least a death sentence for his family's reputation. "Dante, please," Silvio stammered, stepping forward. "A misunderstanding. My daughter. She's young, she's impulsive. She's old enough to know her place," Dante said, "and her place is no longer in my home." "You'll regret this, Volkov," Bianca screamed, her face contorted with rage as Marco and another guard took her by the arms. "You'll regret choosing this gutter rat over me." "Get her out," Dante said, his voice flat with boredom. He turned his back on her, a final, dismissive gesture. As Bianca was dragged from the ballroom, still screaming threats and obscenities, Dante turned to the rest of his stunned guests. He raised his glass. "My apologies for the interruption. Please, enjoy the party, and allow me to properly introduce you to my wife." He had won. He had revealed his queen, executed his rival, and solidified his power in one move. But as he looked down at Serafina, who was shaking in his arms, her eyes dark with a complex mix of fear, relief, and a new, simmering anger, he knew the battle was over. But the real war had just begun. The grand ballroom didn't just empty, it evacuated. The exit was a panicked, silent stampede of silk and tuxedos. The guests, predators and politicians alike, scrambled to flee the blast radius of Dante Volkov's wrath. They knew they had witnessed more than a social faux pas. They had witnessed a public execution and a coronation in the same breath. Dante didn't release his grip. His arm was a steel bar around Serafina's waist, his other hand still crushing her bandaged one. He didn't pull her through the service corridors this time. He dragged her straight across the gleaming, empty expanse of the ballroom, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. He moved like a man possessed, his purpose a visible, dark aura around him. The few remaining staff, Mrs. Petrova, frozen by the kitchen door, her face a mask of disbelief. A young waiter, paralyzed mid-swipe with a napkin, stared, their eyes wide. Serafina felt their gazes like tiny needles. In their eyes, she was no longer the quiet, sympathetic Serafina. She was a liar, a spy, a creature who had pretended to be one of them while secretly being her, the Donna. The humiliation she felt earlier was nothing compared to this sudden, agonizing isolation. Dante ignored them all. He marched her up the grand staircase, his pace so fast she stumbled on the hem of her simple black skirt. He didn't slow down. He kicked open the massive oak doors to his private study, a room she had only ever glimpsed from the hallway. He shoved her inside and followed, kicking the door shut. The click of the heavy tumbler lock snapping into place was as loud as a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The room was dark, panelled in near black mahogany, smelling of old leather, whiskey, and the metallic tang of his cologne. The only light was the cold, sprawling galaxy of the city lights below, viewed through a single, massive pane of bulletproof glass that served as the entire back wall. For a long second, they just stood there, breathing hard. Dante was a silhouette against the city, a creature of the dark. He was still vibrating with adrenaline and coiled rage. He finally let go of her, turning to loosen his tie, a predator settling after a successful kill. The moment his hand left her, Serafina exploded. It wasn't a scream. It was a low, shaking whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "How dare you?" Dante froze, his hand at his collar. He turned slowly, his expression not of anger, but of genuine, arrogant confusion. "What? You heard me," she said, her voice gaining strength. She was trembling, not with fear, but with a volcanic rage that had been building for 6 months. "How dare you? You animal! I just destroyed the woman who humiliated you," he growled, taking a step toward her. "I just ended her father's entire bloodline, publicly. I handed you her future on a silver platter. I'd say your welcome would be more appropriate." "Your welcome?" She laughed, a high, brittle, unhinged sound. "You're welcome. For what? For the humiliation? For the part you made me play? You didn't save me, Dante. You staged me." He stared at her, his head tilted. "You're not making any sense." "Oh, I'll make it make sense," she cried, finally yelling, her voice cracking. "You let her. You've been letting her for days. Don't lie to me." She jabbed a finger toward the wall. "You have cameras in every damned corridor of this house. I know you do. You saw her corner me by the kitchens. You saw her push me. You've watched her taunt me and bully me and treat me like dirt for 4 days, and you did nothing." "It was a trifle," he dismissed, waving his hand. "A spoiled brat being a brat." "A trifle?" Serafina shrieked, advancing on him, pounding a fist against his broad, unmoving chest. "It wasn't a trifle to me. I was your bait. You held me out like a piece of cheese in a trap, just waiting to see which rat would come and nibble. You wanted her to do something, didn't you? You needed her to." "I needed her to show her hand," he corrected, his voice dropping, his patience snapping. He gripped her wrist, his fingers a vice. "You think this was about wine? You think this was about your feelings? Grow up. This was about war. At my expense," she cried, trying to wrench her hand free. "You stood there, in that ballroom, and you watched. You let me fall. You let me bleed. You let me be the fool for the entire city, just so you could have your moment." "Yes," he roared, his face inches from hers. "Yes, I did. I let you fall. I let you bleed. Because I needed everyone in that room to see it. I needed them to see exactly what she was. And I needed them to see exactly what you are. And what am I?" Serafina whispered, all the fight suddenly draining from her, leaving a cold, terrifying emptiness. "What am I to you, Dante? Your prisoner? Your maid? Your wife? Your pawn?" "You," he said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive rumble, his eyes boring into hers, "are the key to everything." He let her go, turning his back on her as he paced to the window, his form blocking the city lights. He ran a hand through his dark hair. "You're right about one thing," he said, his voice now quiet, measured. "I've been watching you for weeks. I've been watching everyone. You think Bianca was the only threat in that room tonight?" He turned back to her. You saw the two men by the French doors? The ones who never touched a drink? The older one with the scar on his jaw, the younger one who looked like he'd rather be at a funeral? Serafina's blood ran cold. She hadn't seen them. She had been too focused on her trays, on Bianca. That, Dante said, was Antonio and Matteo Grimaldi, the men who butchered your family, the men who burned your home to the ground, the men who have been hunting you for 2 years. Serafina's legs buckled. She grabbed the back of a heavy leather chair to keep from falling. They were here? In your house? By my invitation, Dante said, his voice flat. I've been in a negotiation with them for 6 months, ever since I found you. Found me, she breathed, the word like acid. Found you, he confirmed. They've known for months that someone was protecting you. They didn't know who. They thought you were dead. Then they heard whispers. And then, 3 weeks ago, they found their leak. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. He tossed it onto the polished wood. It slid to a stop in front of her. Go on, he said. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open the clasp. She pulled out a single 8x10 photograph. It was her. A grainy telephoto shot of her, in her black uniform and white apron, taking a bag of trash to the service bins. She looked exhausted, small and vulnerable. Tucked behind it was a note. Simple. Typed. We know you have the Hayes girl. Give her to us and we have peace. Hide her, and we go to war. They sent that to me, Dante said. And I knew. I knew my entire house was compromised. They had an informant. Someone on the inside, close to me, who had identified you. Bianca, Serafina whispered, the last piece clicking into place. Bianca, he confirmed. Working for her father, who was cutting a side deal with the Grimaldis. Silvio Valerio was going to trade you for a bigger piece of the shipping lanes. He was going to have Bianca find a way to get you fired, get you disgraced, get you outside the gates, where the Grimaldis could collect you. He saw the look of horror on her face, and his expression hardened. So, yes, he said, stepping close to her again. I let her terrorize you. I needed her to. I needed her to get sloppy. I needed her to get confident. And I needed her to do it publicly. Tonight wasn't just a party. It was a stage. I invited the Grimaldis here to give them my answer. And what was your answer? Serafina asked, her voice barely audible. My answer, Dante said, was you. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. The Grimaldis, Silvio. Everyone. They thought you were my weakness. A little stray I'd taken in. A secret mistress. A bargaining chip. They thought they could take you from me. When Bianca pushed you, when she poured that wine, she wasn't just assaulting a maid. In front of the Grimaldis, she was assaulting my property. She was showing them and everyone that she had no respect for me, or for what was mine. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a murmur. And when I put my arm around you, when I put my ring on your finger, and when I kissed you in front of them all, I was giving them my answer. I was telling them, he whispered, that you are not my weakness. You are my weapon. You are not the Hayes girl they can barter for. You are not my prisoner. You are Donna Volkov. You are my wife. And an attack on you is an attack on me. They're not at war with a splintered family anymore. They're at war with a kingdom. The Volkov and Hayes empires, united. A sudden sharp knock cut through the tension. It wasn't the timid knock of a servant. It was a hard, tactical rap, rap, rap. Enter, Dante called, his eyes never leaving Serafina's. The door opened, and Marco, his head of security, stepped in. He was all business, his eyes sweeping the room, registering his boss's intensity and Serafina's dishevelled, tear-streaked state. He gave no sign of surprise. "Sir, Donna," he said, and the use of her new title was a physical jolt. "The Valerios are secure. They are en route to a private airfield. As you ordered, their assets were frozen at 9:17 p.m. They are neutralized." "Good," Dante said. "And the Grimaldis?" Serafina asked, her new voice sounding strange to her own ears. Marco's gaze flickered to her, a new, profound respect in his eyes. "They left, Donna, immediately after the announcement. They were impressed." "They were more than impressed," Dante said, a dark, dangerous smile touching his lips for the first time. "Weren't they, Marco?" Marco allowed himself a thin smile. "They left a message, sir." He stepped forward and placed a small, elegant black box on the desk. It looked like a ring box, Dante nodded. "Open it, Serafina." She looked from him to the box. She stepped forward and, with a steady hand, lifted the lid. It wasn't a ring. It wasn't a jewel. It wasn't a threat. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, sat a single, perfectly preserved, pressed white rose. "A white rose," Serafina breathed, confused. "The traditional Grimaldi symbol for a truce," Dante said, his voice laced with triumph. "They're backing down." "No," Serafina said, looking at the flower, then at Dante. A cold, hard understanding was settling in her heart. "They're not backing down. They're acknowledging me. They're acknowledging this." She was right, and he knew it. This wasn't a truce. It was a recognition of a new power. She finally understood. The entire 6 months of her life as a maid, it wasn't a prison. It was a test for her, to see if she could survive, to see if she had the steel to be what he needed. "The lie," she said, her voice flat. "It was all a test." "It was a cocoon," he corrected, his voice softer. "I needed you safe. I needed you invisible. But I also needed to see if the girl from the library, the one with the fire in her eyes, was still in there." He came to stand beside her, looking down at the rose. Bianca was a spoiled child. She would have been a terrible queen. She would have broken under the first sign of pressure. "But you bent, but you never broke. You took her worst and you stood back up." He gently took her injured hand. He unwrapped the blood and wine-soaked silk handkerchief. The cut was clean, but deep. He looked at it, then back at her. "You are not a maid, Serafina. You were never meant to be. You are a Volkov. And you are a Hayes. You are the queen of this entire city. You just didn't know it yet." He led her to his desk chair and pushed her gently into it. He went to the bar, not for himself, but for the first aid kit. He came back, and, in a gesture of impossible, disorienting care, he knelt before her. He uncapped the bottle of antiseptic. "This will sting." "I've had worse," she said, her voice a monotone. He cleaned the wound, his touch surprisingly gentle. "The Grimaldis are satisfied. The Valerios are gone. My other rivals saw what happens when someone touches what is mine. The war is over." Serafina looked down at the top of his dark head as he bandaged her hand, his touch light and proprietary. She looked at the white rose on the desk. She thought of the men who had sent it, the men who had murdered her parents. And she looked at the man at her feet, the man who had orchestrated her humiliation and her rise, the man who had saved her by caging her. "No, Dante," she said, her voice cold and clear as the city lights outside. "The war isn't over." He looked up, his grey eyes questioning. "It's just changed," she said. And I'm no longer a pawn. You were right." He smiled, a slow, genuine, terrifying smile of a predator who has just found his equal. "No," he said, rising. "You're not. You're the queen." He took his own heavy signet ring from his finger and pressed it into her good palm. "We'll get you a new one tomorrow. One that fits. One they can see from across the room. From now on you don't hide, you don't serve, you reign, and God help anyone who forgets it." And so, Serafina's life as a ghost ended, and her life as a queen began. The night that started with her humiliation ended with her coronation. But the war is far from over. The Grimaldis now know exactly who she is, and the Valerios are desperate for revenge. Dante may have won the battle, but Serafina is now a public target, and the shadows of the Mafia world are long and dark. The real question is, was she safer as an invisible maid, or is she more of a target as the Donna? The game has just begun. Thank you for listening to this story. If you loved the drama and the twists, and if you want to see what happens next in Dante and Serafina's dangerous world, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good story, and most importantly, click subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an update.